The air in Dembaba hung thick and heavy, like a wet blanket refusing to dry. The sun, usually a fierce warrior in these parts, seemed to cower behind a veil of dust, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like mischievous spirits. Children, normally a riot of laughter and energy, huddled close to their mothers, their eyes wide with a fear that seemed to seep from the very ground beneath their feet. Genevieve, however, moved through the village like royalty, untouched by the unease that gripped everyone else. Her skin glowed, smooth and unblemished, a stark contrast to the weathered faces of the women who watched her pass. Tonight, there was something else, a faint, sweet fragrance that clung to the cool night air like a secret whispered on the wind. It was the scent of Genevieve. Genevieve, the name itself tasted like forbidden fruit on the tongue. She was an enigma, a shimmering mirage in the harsh reality of Dembaba. Her skin was flawless, unmarred by the sun or the years. Her eyes held a spark that defied the slow, grinding passage of time. She walked among them, yet remained untouched by the hardships that aged the women of Dembaba before their time. They watched her, whispered about her, envied her, and secretly, desperately, wanted to know her secret. Once upon a time, in the heart of this sprawling village, life moved at a pace dictated by the sun and the seasons. The women toiled in the fields, their faces etched with the stories of hard work and resilience. They bore children, nursed them, and watched them grow, accepting the lines on their faces as badges of honor, proof of a life lived. But then Genevieve arrived. She came like a whisper on the wind, settling into a small, unassuming cottage on the edge of the village. She kept to herself, tending a small garden filled with strange and unfamiliar plants. Yet, her mere presence was a constant, nagging reminder of what they lacked. Mary, a woman known for her sharp eyes and even sharper tongue, was the first to notice. She had seen Genevieve at the market, buying ingredients for her garden. Mary had always prided herself on her own appearance, but next to Genevieve, she felt like a withered leaf. It wasn't just her youthful glow. It was a certain radiance, an inner light that seemed to emanate from her very being. One day, Mary saw Genevieve applying a cream to her face. It was a thick, pearly substance, unlike anything Mary had ever seen. The aroma was intoxicating, a blend of floral sweetness and something else, something indescribably alluring. Mary, fueled by a potent cocktail of envy and curiosity, watched Genevieve for weeks. She observed her meticulously, piecing together fragments of information. She saw her tending her garden, carefully harvesting rare herbs and flowers. She saw her mixing these ingredients in a small, stone mortar, adding something from a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was the cream. Mary was convinced. That was the source of Genevieve's timeless beauty, and Mary needed to know how to make it. She confided in her friends, Sarah and Abigail. Both women were equally captivated by Genevieve's allure. They, too, had noticed the way their husbands' eyes lingered on her a moment too long, the way the young men of the village seemed drawn to her like moths to a flame. "We have to find out what her secret is," Mary declared, her voice low and conspiratorial. "We have to convince her to share it with us." Abigail, ever the pragmatist, frowned. "She seems like a very private woman. I doubt she'll just tell us." "We'll beg her if we have to," Sarah insisted, her eyes shining with a desperate hope. "We'll offer her anything. We have to try." And so, fortified by a shared desire and a simmering resentment, the three women approached Genevieve's cottage. They found her tending her garden, her hands stained with earth. "Genevieve," Mary began, her voice carefully modulated to sound polite and respectful. We've been watching you. We've noticed how beautiful you are, how young you look." Genevieve paused, her expression unreadable. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "We've seen you using that cream," Mary continued, her voice gaining momentum. "And we were wondering if you would be willing to tell us how you make it?" Genevieve's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is a very personal matter," she said, her voice suddenly cool. "We know," Sarah interjected, her voice pleading, "but we're desperate. We've tried everything, but nothing works. We're getting older and—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the deep-seated fear that gnawed at her. Abigail stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "We're willing to pay you," she said, her voice firm. "We'll pay you anything you ask." Genevieve remained silent for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over the three women. She saw the desperation in their eyes, the yearning for something more. A faint smile played on her lips. "Very well," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I will make the cream for you." The women gasped, their faces lighting up with relief and excitement. "But," Genevieve continued, her voice taking on a new edge, "it will not be cheap. The ingredients are rare and difficult to obtain, and the process is complicated." "We don't care," Mary said quickly. "We'll pay whatever it takes." And they did. They emptied their savings, sold their jewelry, and bartered their finest fabrics. They brought Genevieve offerings of food and labor, eager to please her and secure their share of the miraculous cream. Genevieve accepted their offerings with a gracious smile. She began to prepare the cream in small batches, carefully measuring each ingredient and stirring it with a silver spoon. The aroma filled the air, intoxicating and alluring. The women watched her, mesmerized, their eyes glued to her every move. They begged her to reveal her secret, to tell them exactly what went into the cream. "Patience," Genevieve would say, her voice soothing. "All in good time. You must trust the process." And they did. They trusted her implicitly, blinded by their desire for eternal youth and beauty. The cream worked. Within weeks, the women of Dembaba began to transform. Their skin became smoother, their wrinkles faded, and their eyes regained a youthful sparkle. They were rejuvenated, revitalized, reborn. The news spread like wildfire. Women from neighboring villages flocked to Dembaba, eager to buy Genevieve's miraculous cream. She became a sensation, a local celebrity. Her cottage was always filled with visitors, all clamoring for a chance to purchase her elixir of youth. Genevieve, basking in the attention and the wealth, raised her prices. The cream became a luxury item, accessible only to the wealthiest women in the region. But as Genevieve's fortune grew, a shadow began to fall over Dembaba. Children started to disappear. It wasn't just any cream after all. This cream, Genevieve claimed, could turn back time. It could erase wrinkles, fade scars, and restore the youthful glow that age relentlessly stole away. The women of Dembaba were skeptical at first. They had seen countless remedies promised by traveling merchants, all of which turned out to be nothing more than worthless illusions. But Genevieve was different. She was living proof of her cream's power. The transformation was astonishing. Within weeks of using Genevieve's cream, the women of Dembaba noticed a change. Their skin became softer, their wrinkles less pronounced. They looked younger, felt younger. Soon, the demand for Genevieve's cream became insatiable. Women lined up outside her house before dawn, eager to purchase a small jar of the magical elixir. At first, Genevieve sold her cream for a reasonable price, enough to make a comfortable living. But as her popularity grew, so did her greed. She began to charge exorbitant prices, prices that only the wealthiest families in Dembaba could afford. Yet, even those who had to sell their precious belongings to afford it did so willingly. They were addicted to the promise of eternal youth, a promise Genevieve held tightly in her grasp. As Genevieve's wealth soared, a disturbing trend began to emerge in Dembaba. More and more children started to disappear. A little boy playing near the riverbank, a young girl fetching water from the well, a toddler napping in the shade of a baobab tree, all vanished without a trace. The villagers were distraught. Fear and suspicion poisoned the air. They whispered amongst themselves, wondering if a wild animal was responsible or perhaps a band of ruthless kidnappers. But deep down, a growing sense of dread told them that something far more sinister was at play. The village elder, a wise and respected man named Joseph, noticed the correlation between Genevieve's growing wealth and the rising number of missing children. He tried to voice his concerns, but his words were dismissed as the ramblings of an old man. The women of Dembaba, blinded by their desire for youth, refused to believe that Genevieve could be involved in such a horrific crime. "Papa Joseph, you are just being old and suspicious," one woman Mary said, smoothing cream on her face. Genevieve is a gift. Look how young I look now. Before this cream, my husband almost left me for a younger woman. Another woman chirped in, exactly. Besides, all those children are troublesome. They probably ran away from home. How can so many children run away at the same time? Joseph asked, his voice cracking with worry. We need to investigate. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The allure of Genevieve's cream was too strong. The desire for youth too compelling. They were all caught in Genevieve's web. Genevieve, meanwhile, continued to thrive. She expanded her operation, hiring assistants to help her produce and distribute her cream. She even began to export it to neighboring villages, promising women the same miraculous results. One of these villages was Awu, a small, quiet community nestled in the hills. The women of Awu were just as susceptible to the allure of youth as the women of Dembaba. Soon, Genevieve's cream became a sensation in Awu, and she found herself with a whole new market to exploit. One night, a chilling whisper spread through both Dembaba and Awu. A whisper that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest warriors. A whisper that spoke of ancient spirits and forgotten prophecies. A child had returned. Her name was Priska. She was from Awu. Like the other children who had disappeared, she was barely 8 months old when she vanished. Now, 6 years later, she had reappeared, seemingly out of nowhere. She was found sitting at the edge of the forest, her eyes wide and vacant, her body frail and weak. But she was alive. The news of Priska's return spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of the villagers. They believed it was a sign, a message from the ancestors, a promise that their stolen children could be returned. But Priska's return was more than just a symbol of hope. It was a harbinger of change, a catalyst for action, and a warning of the ancient forces that Genevieve had unwittingly stirred. Priska was not just a child. She was something else, something powerful, something ancient, something that Genevieve had awakened with her greed and her dark magic. And as Priska sat silently at the edge of the forest, her eyes fixed on the horizon, the wind carried a new whisper, a whisper that spoke of retribution, of justice, and of the terrible price that Genevieve would have to pay for her crimes. The whisper said a storm was coming. The crickets had been unusually loud that night, their chirping a frenzied symphony of dread. It was as if even the insects sensed the darkness that had settled over the village of Dembaba. John, a farmer with hands as rough as bark and a heart as strong as an Irako tree, couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, the thin cotton sheet offering little comfort against the unease that gnawed at him. His wife, Mary, lay beside him, her breathing shallow and uneven. He knew she was awake too, her mind likely filled with the same gnawing fear that plagued him. John, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crickets. Did you hear that story about the girl from Awu? John sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Priska? Yes, I heard. Just a child's imagination, Mary. Don't let it trouble you. He knew he was lying, both to her and to himself. He hadn't believed it at first, of course. The idea that Genevieve, with her radiant smile and generous spirit, could be capable of such unspeakable things was absurd. But then he remembered the increasing number of children who had gone missing over the years. The whispered rumors, dismissed as superstition, now echoed in his mind with a chilling clarity. He recalled the conversation he had earlier that day with Peter, the village tailor, who was known to be wise. Peter, what is this I hear about Genevieve and the girl from Awu? John asked, his tone heavy with concern. Peter sighed, his wrinkled face etched with worry. John, I have heard the same things. The girl, Priska, speaks of terrible things, things no child should know. But who are we to believe? Genevieve has always been good to us. She has helped so many people. But what if it's true, Peter? What if she is hiding something? John pressed, his voice laced with anxiety. Peter looked at him, his eyes filled with deep sorrow. Then we must find out the truth, John. For the sake of our children, we must know. The truth, John thought, was a dangerous thing to seek, especially when it concerned someone as influential and respected as Genevieve. But the thought of his own grandchildren, their innocent laughter and bright eyes, spurred him on. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. Mary stirred beside him. But what if it's not imagination, John? What if it's true? Our little Sarah plays with Genevieve's grandchildren sometimes. What if her voice trailed off, choked with fear? He reached out and took her hand, his callous fingers squeezing hers reassuringly. Don't think like that, Mary. We won't let anything happen to Sarah. But even as he spoke the words, a prickle of unease ran down his spine. He couldn't shake off the feeling that they were all in danger. The next morning, the village was buzzing with nervous energy. People spoke in hushed tones, casting furtive glances towards Genevieve's house. The air was thick with suspicion and fear. The village elder, a man named James, a man of immense wisdom and calm demeanor, called a meeting. Under the shade of the ancient baobab tree, the villagers gathered, their faces etched with anxiety. My people, James began, his voice resonating with authority. We have all heard the stories about Genevieve and the girl from Ewu, Priska. Accusations have been made, and concerns have been raised. It is our duty to investigate these claims and determine the truth. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Genevieve, standing at the edge of the crowd, maintained a calm and composed facade. I understand your concerns, Genevieve said, her voice clear and steady. These accusations are baseless and hurtful. I have always been a friend to this village, and I would never do anything to harm our community. Her words seemed to calm some of the villagers, but others remained skeptical. One of them was Thomas, a young man known for his bravery and intelligence. He had always been suspicious of Genevieve, and the recent events had only strengthened his doubts. Genevieve, with all due respect, Thomas said, stepping forward. We have lost too many children in this village. We need to know the truth. Genevieve's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. I understand your pain, Thomas, but these accusations are simply not true. I am willing to cooperate with any investigation to prove my innocence. James nodded. We will conduct a thorough investigation, he declared. We will search Genevieve's house and question anyone who may have information about this matter. The villagers dispersed, their hearts filled with trepidation. They knew that the truth, whatever it may be, would forever change their community. That afternoon, a group of villagers, led by James and Thomas, went to Genevieve's house. The house, usually a beacon of warmth and hospitality, now seemed cold and menacing. As they approached, John noticed something unusual. The windows were all shuttered, and the air was heavy with the cloying scent of sweet, rotting flowers. Genevieve greeted them at the door, her smile strained. James, Thomas, what is the meaning of this? She asked, her voice barely betraying her unease. We need to search your house, Genevieve, James said, his voice firm but respectful. There have been accusations. Genevieve hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Of course, she said, her voice tight. I have nothing to hide. The villagers entered the house, their eyes scanning every corner. The interior was immaculate as always. Expensive furniture gleamed in the dim light, and priceless artwork adorned the walls. But beneath the surface of wealth and beauty, John sensed a darkness, a suffocating presence that made his skin crawl. As the search progressed, they found nothing suspicious. The kitchen was spotless, the bedrooms were neatly arranged, and the living room was impeccably decorated. Some of the villagers began to whisper that perhaps Priska's story was just a figment of her imagination. But Thomas remained unconvinced. He had a feeling that Genevieve was hiding something, and he was determined to find it. He noticed a small, unassuming door in the hallway, a door that seemed out of place in the otherwise grand house. What's behind this door, Genevieve? Thomas asked, pointing to the door. Genevieve hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. It's just a storage room, she said, her voice trembling slightly. There's nothing of interest in there. Thomas didn't believe her. He pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. We're going down there, Thomas said, his voice resolute. Genevieve's face paled. No, you can't go down there. It's not safe. But Thomas ignored her pleas. He grabbed a lantern and started down the stairs, followed by James and John. The air grew colder and damper as they descended, and the smell of rotting flowers became overwhelming. The staircase opened into a small, underground chamber. The sight that greeted them was so horrific that John almost vomited. Scattered across the floor were tiny bones, the bones of infants. In one corner, there was a blood-stained mortar and pestle, and lining the walls were rows upon rows of glass jars filled with a crimson cream. The truth was undeniable. Genevieve was a monster. A collective gasp filled the chamber. Mary screamed, burying her face in John's shoulder. Even James, a man who had seen his fair share of horrors in his lifetime, looked ashen. Thomas turned to Genevieve, his eyes blazing with anger and disgust. "What have you done?" he roared. "What have you done to these children?" Genevieve stood at the top of the stairs, her face contorted with rage. "You fools," she shrieked. "You ignorant fools. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to maintain my beauty? To help this village?" Her words were met with silence, broken only by the sobs of the women. The villagers stood frozen, unable to comprehend the magnitude of her evil. Just as the full horror of Genevieve's actions began to sink in, a blood-curdling scream echoed from outside. It was Sarah. John and Mary looked at each other, their faces etched with pure terror. Without a word, they raced out of the chamber and back into the house, their hearts pounding in their chests. Outside, the scene was chaotic. Villagers were running in all directions, shouting and screaming. And in the center of the chaos, they saw Sarah. She was standing near the edge of the forest, her eyes wide with terror. In her hand, she clutched a small, blood-stained doll. "Grandpa! Grandma!" she cried, her voice trembling. The woman took Priska. John and Mary rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. "What happened, Sarah?" John asked, his voice hoarse with fear. "What did you see?" Sarah pointed towards the forest, her fingers shaking. "I saw her, Grandpa. The woman with the pretty face. She took Priska into the woods, and she had a big knife." A wave of anger surged through John. He had to save Priska. He had to stop Genevieve, no matter the cost. "Mary, take Sarah home," he said, his voice steely. "I'm going after them." Mary nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Be careful, John," she whispered. "Please be careful." John kissed Sarah on the forehead and then turned and ran into the forest, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He followed the trail of broken branches and trampled leaves, his senses on high alert. Deeper and deeper into the forest, he went until he reached a clearing. And there, in the center of the clearing, he saw them. Genevieve was holding Priska by the arm, her face a mask of fury. In her other hand, she held a gleaming knife. "You can't stop me, John," Genevieve shrieked. "I will not let you ruin everything I've worked for." John stood his ground, his eyes fixed on Genevieve. "Let her go, Genevieve," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This doesn't have to end like this." Genevieve laughed, a wild, chilling sound that sent shivers down John's spine. "It's too late for that, John. I've already gone too far." She raised the knife, her eyes gleaming with madness. John knew he had to act fast. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Let her go, Genevieve," he repeated, his voice now filled with anger. Genevieve hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between John and Priska. And then, with a sudden movement, she lunged forward, the knife aimed straight at Priska's heart. But John was faster. He lunged forward too, tackling Genevieve to the ground. The knife flew from her hand and landed in the dirt. Genevieve struggled against him, her strength surprising. She clawed at his face, kicking and biting. But John held on tight, his grip unyielding. "You're finished, Genevieve," he said, his voice filled with rage. "It's over." Suddenly, Genevieve twisted with supernatural strength. She grabbed a nearby rock and smashed it against John's head. He saw stars and everything went black. When he regained consciousness, the clearing was silent. Genevieve and Priska were gone. The knife lay abandoned in the dirt. Back at Genevieve's house, the mob that stormed Genevieve's mansion found only emptiness. The opulent rooms, once symbols of wealth and beauty, were now silent witnesses to unspeakable acts. Mirrors were shattered, their silvered surfaces cracked and bleeding dark reflections. The air itself seemed tainted, heavy with the scent of decay and despair. And the cream, the infamous beauty cream that had been Genevieve's obsession, her source of power. The once pearly concoction had transformed into a viscous, black sludge, bubbling faintly as if still alive. It was as if the evil that had fueled its creation had finally consumed it from within. "She's gone," Thomas, the village elder, announced, his voice a dry rasp. "But this isn't over." His words were met with a chorus of groans and sobs. Some villagers began to methodically destroy the mansion, smashing furniture, tearing down tapestries, as if by obliterating the physical structure, they could erase the memory of Genevieve's existence. Days turned into weeks, and the initial frenzy gave way to a quiet, gnawing fear. The villagers tried to resume their lives, to plant their crops and tend to their families, but a pall of suspicion hung over everything. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whispered warning. And then they began to disappear. Old Martha, who lived on the edge of the forest, vanished first. Her chickens were left untended, her stew pot still simmering on the kerosene stove. Then Kelvin, the blacksmith, sturdy and strong, failed to appear at the forge. His hammer lay abandoned, cold and silent. Each disappearance was met with renewed panic, quick, fear-filled searches that yielded nothing. The screams of the missing echoed in their minds, swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness. The whisper started again, darker and more desperate than before. "It's Genevieve," they said. "She's taking revenge." Just when despair threatened to engulf them entirely, Priska reappeared. She was found huddled beneath the ancient oak tree at the edge of the village, her eyes wide and vacant. "Priska, where have you been?" Mary, who had always been kind to the child, rushed to her side. Priska didn't answer at first. She only stared, shivering uncontrollably. Then she spoke, her voice a mere breath. "She's not human, and she's coming." Before anyone could question her further, she clutched her head, her eyes rolling back in their sockets. She fell into Mary's arms, unconscious. The villagers carried Priska to Mary's hut, laying her gently on a straw mattress. Mary tended to her, bathing her face with cool water and whispering soothing words. When Priska finally awoke, she seemed different. The vacant look was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. "You have to leave," she said, her voice stronger now, but still tinged with fear. "She's coming for all of you." "But where can we go?" Thomas asked, his face etched with worry. "This is our home." "It's not safe here anymore," Priska insisted. "She's too powerful. She can't be stopped." Her words were met with disbelief and anger. They had endured so much, lost so much. They couldn't simply abandon their homes, their livelihoods, their ancestral lands. "We'll fight," John's wife, Sarah, declared, her voice trembling but resolute. "We'll protect ourselves." Priska shook her head sadly. "You don't understand. You can't fight her. She's not like anything you've ever faced." As the villagers debated their options, a new arrival appeared in Dembaba. A merchant, dressed in fine clothes and driving a brightly painted cart, came peddling wares from a faraway city. His most alluring product was a beauty cream, promising to erase wrinkles, restore youth, and leave skin radiant and flawless. Ladies, gather round," the merchant called, his voice booming. "I have here a miracle cream, guaranteed to turn back the hands of time. You'll look 10, 20 years younger. Your husbands won't be able to resist you. Cheating on you with a younger maiden won't even cross his silly mind." The women of Dembaba, despite their recent traumas, were drawn to the merchant's promises. They had always valued beauty, and the allure of eternal youth was particularly tempting in a village where life was hard and age came quickly. They gathered around his cart, examining the cream with eager eyes. It was pearly white, with a delicate floral scent. It looked familiar. "Where did you get this cream?" Mary asked, her voice sharp. The merchant smiled, a slick, unsettling smile. "A woman I met in a distant city. A very beautiful woman, with skin as smooth as silk. She said the cream had been in her family for generations." Mary's blood ran cold. She knew with a sickening certainty that the merchant spoke of Genevieve. As the women crowded around the merchant's cart, a figure stood in the shadows, watching. A woman, tall and slender, with skin as pale as moonlight and eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. She didn't approach the cart, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. She simply watched, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Sarah, who had been about to purchase the cream, glanced up and saw her. A shiver ran down her spine. There was something unsettlingly familiar about the woman, something that stirred a deep, primal fear within her. She looked away, then back again. The woman was still there, her eyes fixed on the crowd. Sarah's gaze met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something flicker in the woman's eyes. A spark of triumph, a glint of madness. Sarah recoiled, stumbling backward. She bumped into the merchant's cart, knocking over a small mirror that was propped against a jar of cream. The mirror shattered on the ground, sending shards of glass scattering across the dusty earth. And in one of those shards, Sarah saw it, a reflection of the woman in the shadows, but distorted, twisted, wrong. The reflection flickered, wavering like a heat haze. For a moment, it wasn't the beautiful woman she saw, but a grotesque caricature, a monstrous parody of beauty. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked around frantically, trying to point out the woman to the others, but she was gone, vanished into the shadows, as if she had never been there. Sarah tried to warn the others, to tell them what she had seen, but they dismissed her fears as the product of grief and exhaustion. They were too eager to believe in the merchant's promises, too desperate for a glimmer of hope. One by one, the women of Dembaba purchased the cream, eager to reclaim their youth and beauty. They applied it to their faces, their hands, their bodies, hoping for a miracle. But instead of miracles, they found only nightmares. The cream worked at first. Wrinkles faded, skin tightened, and a youthful glow returned. But the effects were fleeting, and the price was terrible. Their hair began to fall out, their teeth rotted, and their minds grew clouded and confused. They became frail and withered, their bodies consumed from the inside out. And as they deteriorated, their children began to sicken and die. The truth was finally revealed, too late to save them. The cream was not a miracle cure, but a curse. It was made from the essence of stolen youth, from the life force of innocent children. Genevieve had returned, not in body, but in spirit, infecting their lives with her poisonous greed. She had found a way to continue her reign of terror, to perpetuate her cycle of death and destruction. Mary and Thomas, along with a handful of other villagers who had resisted the lure of the cream, knew that they had to act. They had to find a way to stop Genevieve, to break her hold on Dembaba. They sought out Priska, hoping that she could offer some guidance. But Priska was gone again, vanished as mysteriously as before. Desperate, they turned to the old stories, the legends of the village, searching for a way to defeat a creature of such darkness. They learned of an ancient ritual, a way to banish evil spirits from the land. It required a sacrifice, a willing offering of something pure and innocent. They knew what they had to do. Under the light of the full moon, Mary, Thomas, and the remaining villagers gathered at the ancient oak tree. They built a pyre of wood, and on top of it, they placed the last jar of Genevieve's cream. They chanted the ancient words, their voices rising in a chorus of defiance. They called upon the spirits of their ancestors, pleading for their protection. As the flames consumed the cream, a dark shadow descended upon the village. The wind howled, the trees swayed, and the earth trembled. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, with eyes that burned like embers. It was Genevieve, or something that had once been Genevieve. She lunged at them, her hands outstretched, her claws dripping with black sludge. Mary stepped forward, her face resolute. She held aloft a small, silver locket containing a lock of Priska's hair. It was the sacrifice, the offering of innocence. As Genevieve reached for her, Mary threw the locket into the flames. A blinding light erupted, followed by a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, and the air crackled with energy. When the light subsided, Genevieve was gone. The shadow had lifted, and the wind had died down. The village was silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Dembaba was forever scarred, forever haunted by the memory of Genevieve and her unspeakable crimes. but it was also free. Years passed. Dembaba slowly began to heal, to rebuild. The villagers learned to live with their scars, to remember the past without being consumed by it. But the story of Genevieve was never forgotten. It was passed down from generation to generation, a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and the corrupting power of beauty. And sometimes, on dark and stormy nights, the villagers would swear they could still hear the whispers of children carried on the wind. As for Priska, no one ever saw her again. Some said she had been taken by the spirits, rewarded for her bravery. Others said she had simply moved on, seeking a new life far away from the darkness of Dembaba. And then, one day, a traveler arrived in a distant city. He was passing through the marketplace when he saw a woman selling beauty creams. She was incredibly beautiful, with skin as smooth as silk and eyes that sparkled like diamonds. Her cream was pearly white, with a delicate floral scent. The traveler paused, a shiver running down his spine. There was something familiar about her, something that stirred a deep, primal fear within him. He looked closer and he saw it. A faint smirk playing on her lips, a glint of madness in her eyes. He turned and fled, running as fast as he could, knowing that he had seen the face of evil, reborn and ready to strike again. Genevieve was never meant to die. Driven by power, evil, and the spirit of the underworld, she will continue to strive to perfect the act of infant maceration to sustain her beauty and youth. And as long as there is vanity in the world, her reflection would continue to flicker like a shadow, waiting for the chance to emerge once more.